Hey guys, Coach Chad here. Today I am talking about energy systems again. This is what I said I would start to do a few more videos on. And I'm actually going to do a review of all of the CIC workouts as well in the future here and go through each one of them from an energy system perspective and how you might want to train for them so you understand kind of where we're coming from. But as an extension from last week's talk of the three energy systems, which we just did a brief discussion of the aerobic system, the alactic system up here, the aerobic system, and the lactic system. So remember, some of the terms here, we had the alactic system was the anaerobic alactic or ATP-PC system. Then you had the lactic system, which is also known as the glycolytic system or the anaerobic lactic. And then the aerobic system over here, which is your oxidative system, your long range system. So in the simplest of format, the alactic system is basically looking at anything under about 10 to 20 seconds of work. So we're just going to say under 20 seconds of work, okay? That's what we're going to break that one down to right now. Then when you look at the lactic system, we're going to say underneath 60 seconds of work. And then when we get to the aerobic, we're going to say 2 minutes plus. Now that doesn't completely add up, but there's a big variation across these as they're being used. And the key point to this video actually is that there never is just the use of one energy system. What you're doing is you're using all three in a combination to anything that you're doing. So I used the example last day of just simply running straight forward as fast as you can until you can no longer run. The first 10 seconds, or actually the first like 1 to 2 steps is anaerobic alactic power. Then up to 10 seconds is anaerobic alactic capacity. And then you start moving into lactic zones. And then you go lactic power, lactic capacity, aerobic power, aerobic capacity. So you just keep going on this continuum. The catch is it doesn't really actually work that way. That's a very poor way to think about the energy systems running because it doesn't actually work that. It's more of a percentage contribution of each one of them as you're moving along. So what I've always found very, very useful is this concept of the triangle here, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to break down a couple base workouts and then we're going to use some CrossFit style workouts to understand this better. So if you think aerobically, let's think of something really aerobic. So like Ironman, marathon, it's way down here in the corner, okay? So that's strictly aerobic. But when you think of it, let's say I ran a marathon, 26.5 miles or whatever it is. If I'm going to call that aerobic, it's actually 98% aerobic, 1.5% lactic, and 0.5% alactic. Those numbers exactly? No, but it's never 100%, okay? So that's what my point I'm trying to make here is that there's always a split, a contribution. Now, if we think lactic, this would be like a 30-second death sprint on the death cycle, on the air bike. So 30-second max effort, lactic, okay? But realistically, it's actually probably more likely 90% lactic, 10 or 15% alactic, 5% aerobic, something like that, okay? Then if you think of something alactic, something very, very powerful, so think 1 RM snatch or a max vertical jump, okay? Or 20 meter sprint as fast as you can, something like that. That would be very alactic driven. So now we have the ends of the spectrum here on these three ideas of the triangle. Now we're not breaking down power and capacity. We're not doing any of that in this concept. This is just a way to visualize and think about energy systems. So if we go to something more CrossFit based, let's think a 15-minute AMRAP of light deadlifts, like 65-95 for 5 deadlifts, then 50 double unders and 15 burpees. AMRAP in 15 minutes. So all light, some body weight work, right? Nothing super power output or high power output. It's clearly going to be aerobic at 15 minutes. But because we're moving some weight, we're deadlifting, we're moving our body weight, which is an external object and it's a load itself, it's not going to be as aerobic as a marathon, right? So we're going to put that maybe like right there, okay? All right, so clearly it's moving away from aerobic, but it's still in the aerobic zone. But we're using more lactic capacity, like more lactic work here because we have loaded movement. So it's going to shift a little bit more to that way than this way, okay? So that's how we can think of that. But now let's take that exact same exercise and make the light deadlift a 225/315 deadlift. So it's heavy deadlift for 5. Then it's burpee bar pull-ups or something like that. So burpee pull-ups instead of double unders. And then instead of burpees, it's box jump overs, okay? So now you can visualize those changes of movement instantly become more systemic in nature. Okay, they're more power output to every single one of those movements. First, the deadlift has more load, so it takes a lot more maximal force. So we're relying a lot more on our anaerobic alactic system and lactic system to produce that power. And when we do the burpee pull-up, it takes a lot of effort to move a body weight down and jump up to the pull-up. So again, more power output. And the same thing applies to the burpee box jump over than just a burpee. So because of that, it's still a 15-minute AMRAP, but its relative contribution might look more like that. Okay, so we're moving over to the lactic. So we're going to go a much less aerobic capacity, adding more lactic and more alactic portions of the energy systems to that work. Okay, now I'm not, again, making a claim on a perfect percentage, but it's just an idea of how you want to visualize this. So the light AMRAP was more aerobically driven. The heavy AMRAP is a little higher on the scale of alactic and definitely shifted over to the lactic as well. So you can see how that moves. Now, if we take a different exercise, let's move our different workout. Let's use my favorite workout of all time, Fran, okay? So Fran is 21-15-9 thrusters and pull-ups, and it's 65, 95-pound thrusters. Now, when I was doing CrossFit regularly and competitive in CrossFit, my best Fran time was 2:28, okay? That's actually a really reasonable time. Now, 2:28, that's clearly outside of the lactate zone that we said, but it's over the 2-minute zone of aerobic, but only by 28 seconds. So much of what I was doing was in the lactic zone. So this could be argued that it would be down here somewhere. Okay, so it's in primarily lactic zone of when I was working, but clearly because I was past the 2 minutes, I'm moving a little bit aerobically, and because I'm loaded and it's very fast, I'm getting pieces of alactic as well. So maybe now the relative contribution is actually 70% lactic or glycolytic, 20% aerobic, 10% alactic, something like that, okay? Now, if we were to make that Fran, but with 135 pounds instead of 95, and move the pull-ups to chest to bars, we just increase the power output. So we're demanding more of the alactic and the lactic system. Now, catches, if that workout now takes me 4 minutes to do, right, then obviously I'm going to start adding rest periods in. I obviously had to break it up. And because I have breakups, then it starts to work because I can't keep that power up for as long. All of a sudden, I start to pull on more aerobic energy system and maybe more alactic system within that. So you can see how maybe that moves to here then. So it moves from here to here. Okay. And again, this is always a bit of a guess. I've done this with coaches in the past and different trainers trying to explain energy system work. And it's a bit of a guess, but you start to understand that kind of realm of what we're talking about where, it's moving around relative to the individual, relative to the workout and what's inside of the workout, because the workout's going to be really dictate that if it's a heavy workout, a light workout. Okay. So even though some workouts may be 15 minutes, they clearly can have very different workouts inside of 15 minutes, right? If you just went for a run for 15 minutes versus dragging a sled for 15 minutes versus doing a brick method where you're doing pull-ups and say bench press inside of 15 minutes for an AMRAP. Each one of these is drawing different levels of each one of those energy systems in order to get the output that we want. So that's why our job as coaches is to influence the training programs to match what it is that we want to train. And that's why there's so much undulation within the training programs over time. And you're going to get a lot of those times where it's like, I don't like these workouts. A good example being HIIT workouts or lactate burst workouts. A lot of people don't like doing those. I get it. It's uncomfortable. But it's part of the bigger picture of training, the bigger picture of programming, the bigger picture of being a better athlete. These things are absolutely required, okay? And I'm talking primarily about the sport of CrossFit, because if you're talking about weightlifting, the demands of weightlifting are incredibly different. All we require in weightlifting is alactic work. Right? That's all we really care about, is we just want to be alactically driven and from a power perspective, because that's where we live. But we need a strong aerobic system, not a strong one, but we need a functioning aerobic system to be able to recover properly. Because not only are we just talking about the work that's being done, we also have to discuss the recoverability of these energy systems. So in order to recover better within the lactic system and the alactic system, the aerobic system is part of how we will recover the energy substrates that are within that. Okay, and then in later videos, I'm going to start to get into how we break this down into power and capacity. And as we start to understand these energy systems for their different demands, if you will, or their different capacities, then all of a sudden the training becomes different as well, as does the rest intervals, which I'll get to in later videos. So either way, you guys can start thinking about every workout you do, where does it land on this little triangle? And how does it work, right? And you might want to play around with that, and you'll have a much better idea of how to start putting together some of these energy system concepts in your mind, right? And again, if we sat down and gave example workouts, we most likely would not have, if we had to guess the relative contributions of the percentage of the energy systems, we wouldn't be the same, but we'd be in the same ballpark, understanding where energy is coming from, right? Now, that changes a lot relative to the individual's sex, muscle mass development, previous training, genetic potentials, and fiber type testing, all that kind of stuff. In order to know this exactly, you actually have to be hooked up to metabolic machines. You have to be in a lab. We'd have to have, oxygen and VO2 carts to be able to actually measure oxygen and carbon dioxide outputs. And then you get even deeper where you start to understand what were the limitations to these energy systems. Are they cardiac limitations? Are they muscular limitations? Are they respiratory limitations? Each one of these play an integral part in the training, okay? And I got some really cool stuff coming up in the future where I can talk more about that, because we're going to be starting to do some research on this again, which I'm really excited about, okay? For another video though, all right? So I'll leave it there for right now. Energy System 1, that's all, as always, a long video. If you got here, thank you. I appreciate it, and we'll see you soon, team. Have fun. Bye-bye.